Who do you think was the biggest drug lord in the world? Was it Pablo Escobar or El Capo? And the answer is none of them. It was Queen Victoria. Shocked? Don't be. Here's the story. Over a century before the likes of Escobar and El Capo rose to infamy, Queen Victoria ran a drug empire so vast and profitable it made their operations look like small-time hustles. Despite her reputation as a monarch, Queen Victoria's personal habit revealed a surprisingly modern relationship with medicine. Ascending the throne at just 18, she defied the stiff and elderly image that was often associated in her era. In fact, Victoria routinely used pharmaceuticals that were socially accepted during the 19th century in Britain, from laudanum to cannabis tinctures. She leaned on the remedies for her time to ease childbirth, menstrual pain, and pressures of royal life. Far from being a sign of recklessness, her use of these substances reflected the medical norms of her age when opium-based treatments were often prescribed for everyday ailments. Cocaine was another of her darling. It wasn't illegal, it was new, and Europe has recently started experimenting with it. There are plenty of fun and exciting ways to consume cocaine in the early 1800s. But Queen Victoria's personal preferences were chewing gum and wine. But her boldest endorsement came during childbirth when she embraced chloroform anesthesia with gusto. Holding a saturated handkerchief to her face for nearly an hour, she later described the sensation as delightful beyond measure. So that was the personal consumption story. Now let's talk about how this turned into a profitable trade. So it started with tea. Britain had a tea problem. 5% of its population was consuming tea, a lot of tea, and most of it was coming from China. But the problem was Britain had nothing to trade with China in return for tea. China was getting richer and Britain, they were getting jealous. So they had to figure out a way to trade something with China, something they craved. Opium, because it ticked all the boxes. The Brits had tons of it because it grew abundantly in India, which was under British control. It was an amazingly effective painkiller, which meant the Chinese were willing to pay insanely high prices for it. And most important, it was super addictive, which meant the Brits could jack up the prices even more. Thanks to the miracle of opium, the trade imbalance was reversed overnight. China was forced to return all the silver the British had spent on tea, plus a great deal more. Now it was China, not Britain, that was raking up ruinous trade deficits. The Emperor of China grew impatient and assigned his top man, Lin Zhezhu. His mission was to put an end to this opium inflow into China. He tried diplomacy, but it failed. He even wrote a respectful letter to the Queen questioning her morality and her actions, because China was sending precious and useful things to Britain like tea, silk, porcelain pots. And what was it getting in return? Opium, which was making its population addict. But the British Empire wasn't ready to give up its lucrative drug operation, because now opium sales were responsible for 15 to 20% of the British Empire's entire annual revenue. The Queen didn't bother to read the letter. It went into spam. This meant the dodgy, persistent Li Zhizhu needed to find another way to get her attention. So, in the spring of 1839, he intercepted a fleet of British ships, seized a massive shipment of opium, and ordered his soldiers to dump it all into the southern China Sea. This time, the 20-year-old monarch did notice. When Li Zhizhu and his men dumped 2.5 million pounds of British opium into the sea, she declared war on China, also known as the First Opium War. British forces laid waste to the Chinese army and slaughtered tens of thousands of Chinese citizens. The emperor had no choice but to give in and had to sign this one-sided so-called peace treaty with the British Empire. They had to hand over Hong Kong, had to open even more ports so that more opium could flow in, had to grant immunity to the British citizens who were living in China. So, yes, the once mighty and fearsome and domitable empire had fallen into disgrace. Thus began the period referred to in the textbooks as China's century of humiliation. It was this ruthless, unabashed self-interest that made her the most successful drug kingpin of all time. Though because she genuinely believed that cocaine was a safe, healthy energy booster with no ill effects, Queen Victoria refused to sell it to the Chinese. She was happy to sell them all the opium in the world, whether they wanted it or not. But they would better not touch her cocaine.